So, hello everybody that's joining us, and welcome to the Law Evening. My name's Simon McCaffrey. I'm the admissions tutor for the law school, and I'm joined by colleague Professor Karen Harrison and two of our students, Callie and Callum. And we'll all be answering your questions in a little bit. Before we get to that, I'm going to see if I can share my screen, which would be awfully good. You should all see that. So if anybody can't see that, do please shout at me. And basically, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what it's like studying law. Now, obviously, I can only talk about it, how it works at Lincoln. And there's a couple of sort of distinguishing features of Lincoln, if you like. Firstly, we're actually quite a small law school, but we like that. We think that's our strong point, because it's very much a community, if you like. So the idea is we get to know you, you get to know us. So if we get to know you, then we'll know that look in your eye when you're not quite understanding something. And if you get to know us, you'll know I can ask Simon a question and he won't make me look silly for asking it. So it's very much a collaborative thing. At school, it tends to be an us and them thing. Here, it's just us, and we're all trying to get the same result, i.e. the best possible degree that you can get. So it involves a lot of questioning and things like that. And of course, one of the things we hope you'll do later is ask us some questions, because if you ask us a question, it then becomes our job to explain it as many different ways as it takes until either you understand or one of us dies. So that's the plan, is work together. We think that people work best when they're happy and relaxed, so that's the atmosphere we try and have, and it's a very collaborative thing. Now, law is an academic discipline. People have generally the assumption that law is a very, very serious and very, very difficult subject. And of course, we like to encourage them in thinking that, because then we can justify charging them a fortune for our services afterwards. However, law is not as frightfully difficult as everybody thinks. The hard thing about law is the amount of it. So it's very much a subject where it's reading for a degree. And you kind of approach it from 2 points of view. Just knowing what the law says is actually rather dull. You can probably Google that. You don't really need us for that. But what we need to know is, does it make sense? Is it coherent? So, for example, imagine you guys are a jury and I'm in the dock and I'm up for burglary. Not a huge shift, I know I look shifty. And before you decide whether I'm innocent or guilty, you are told I have got 10 previous convictions for burglary. Now, are you going to judge me on the evidence in the case, or are you going to judge me on my previous convictions? Now, my personal view is that shouldn't happen, but it routinely does since the Criminal Justice Act of 2003. So it's looking at the law to see if it makes sense and criticising it. And one of the great things about law is you can have different opinions. As long as they're informed and researched, you can have different opinions. So if you like arguing, law's a great thing. Questioning, does it work? Is it effective? Does locking people up work particularly well? Those sorts of things. How could the law be improved? It's not necessarily at university level about the nuts and bolts of being a practicing lawyer, how to fill in a conveyance, those sorts of things, or how to advise clients, or how to negotiate a deal, or how to be an advocate. Although all of those are skills that you will pick up along the way through your law degree. Now, in terms of letting people into law, there are no particular subjects required. I always think it's grossly unfair that some universities turn their noses up at certain qualifications. If you've been encouraged to study something as a valid qualification, and we should accept it. So our policy is that if UCAS give you points for it, I knew you said ACAS there for some reason, if UCAS give you points for it, then we will accept it. Now, some people study A-level law, some people don't. It's a double-edged sword in my view. If you have studied A-level law, then you have some idea of what you're letting yourself in for. You didn't watch 3 episodes of Suits and think, that's the very thing for me, because that might have been misleading. On the other hand, you have to be careful, because you may come across some of the same topics at university level, and it's tempting to dismiss it and go, oh, well, I did that at A-level. You won't have done it in the same way. So it can be a boon if you use it right. In terms of the points required, well, for Lincoln it's 120 points, which translates 3 birdies and old. Some universities also use one test. We don't use that. It's an aptitude test that there's a list of the universities that use it. So most people do a law degree thinking they're going to become a solicitor or barrister, although it is actually a really good degree, whatever you want to do. If you have a law degree, it says a lot about you. Everybody knows you did not get it off the back of a crisp packet. You earned it. And there's a lot of transferable skills in a law degree. So that ability to go through a load of information, pick out what the relevant bits are, and construct a persuasive argument and present that is a really highly transferable skill. So it will only ever open doors for you, it will never close them. If you do want to go into the law, then generally it's solicitors or barristers. So solicitors work in firms, they deal directly with clients. They don't generally appear in the higher courts, although more recently, you'll notice I put at the bottom the lines becoming blurred, because you can have higher rights of audience. So you do get solicitors appearing in the higher courts now. Barristers work in chambers and they're self-employed. Now, it is generally thought it is harder to become a barrister than it is a solicitor, not least because of the self-employment aspect of it. If you think about it, self-employed people, if they don't earn, they don't eat. So there is this perception that barristers are minted and making a lot of money, and the successful ones are, but it can be a hard road starting out. Generally, they don't deal directly with clients. The instructions pass through a solicitors, and they act as advocates in all courts. So if it's the advocacy side that gets your blood going, then barristers what to aim for. So how do you qualify as a solicitor? We do the academic stage, so it can be an LLB or it can even be a non-law degree. It used to be, until very recently, that you had to do a law degree or another degree and then a GDL. That's changing from next year. So instead of having to have a law degree, you then do the next stage, which is a solicitor's qualifying exam. And that's a 2-part exam. There will be any number of courses springing up for people to train for that exam, rather than the legal practice course that used to be the case. And you still have to do 2 years of qualifying legal work experience. It's not necessarily the old traditional training contract that everybody had to get, and it can be split in up to 4 different firms or what have you. Barristers remain much more similar, so you do the LLB or a BA, qualifying law degree, or a non-law degree and a conversion course, and then you do the bar professional training course, which lasts 9 months, and then what you're really after is a pupillage with a barrister, and so you learn at the feet of the master. Astonishingly, they used to be unpaid. People did it for love of it, but these days they are generally paid. So you get a more diverse section of people becoming barristers. Now, what's on your law degree? Everybody, when they say, "Oh, I want to study law," usually think about crime and criminal law, and as good fortune would have it, Karen is going to talk to you about that presently. But there are 7 areas that you have to know about. So constitutional law, which has the fortune of being quite interesting for the first time in some time. There's lots of constitutional questions about at the moment with Brexit and all that stuff. Contract law, so that's fairly straightforward. Criminal, you know about. But you have to do land, equity and trust, European law and tort law. And it has to be 2/3 law. So if any of you are thinking of doing a joint law degree, that then becomes quite prescriptive in terms of choices. On a straight law degree, you get options from level 2 onwards. But if you're doing a joint, then it becomes quite prescriptive in terms of choice, because whenever you're not doing your law modules, you have to do your non-law modules. And one of the reasons that a degree is still very well respected when some other degrees maybe aren't so much, I won't mention any names, but media, is there is a preference for assessment by examination. Clearly in the current COVID crisis, that normal preference has been replaced with online assessments and what have you, but generally speaking, exams are the way we go. and people get very nervous about exams, but it's about mindset, really. If I asked each of you your favourite TV programme and asked you to write about it for an hour, you would have no difficulty with that at all, because you know the characters, you understand the plots, etc. So all we have to do is get you to that level of comfort, because the best cure for exam nerves is I know this. And here are some of the electives you can choose. So one of the great things about law is you can take it off in a number of different directions. So you might be into family law. You might think, no, I want to make an extraordinary amount of money, so I'm going to go down the commercial law route. You might get into international law, all sorts. And one of the options is a dissertation. So even if we don't offer a module on something, providing it has some legal content and you're fascinated by it, and you can ask to do your final year dissertation on that, and you can do as part of your final year assessment. So the idea is you can really shape the degree to the stuff you're interested in, because that's what you're going to do best at. How do we teach and learn you? Well, it's a bit different from at school. Generally speaking, they tend to put everything you need to know in your hand. We don't do that. We teach you how to find out everything you need to know. So you have lectures. Usually that's, a couple of hundred people in a lecture hall. This year is rather different. It's me talking to 200 people from my back bedroom, much the same as I'm talking to you now. There is a great deal of reading, as I mentioned earlier. So textbooks only get you so far. What you need to read really is cases, because that will tell you what the judges were thinking when they made that decision. Statutes and journal articles are very important. Journal articles are different scholars' opinions on different legal issues, and by reading several of those, it helps you to form your opinions. We have seminars and tutorials, so they're small groups, usually about 15 in a group, and what that means is that you can question us and work through anything that you're not quite understanding, voice your opinions and those sorts of things. And we have workshops and presentations. So a number of ways to help you. I'll just go back to that. In addition to that, we have got fantastic facilities, as most universities have. So we have a very well stocked library. We have lots of online resources, as you might expect, such as Westlaw and those sorts of things. So there's lots of resources to help you with all this. I should mention that also you get a personal tutor as soon as you arrive, and you keep that person for 3 years. You're with her. So if ever it feels a little overwhelming, there's always someone you can go and have a chat to and get some assistance from. So in terms of assessments, I've mentioned the exam, various types, usually unseen, sometimes we're seeing questions. Essays, you'll be familiar with those. Some in-class tests, presentations, so they can be group or individual. Moots for the uninitiated, or a mock appeal. So we put the students in groups, we give them a scenario set in the Supreme Court, for example, and there are 2 grounds of appeal, and the students have to go off, research those grounds of appeal, come back and present it. And we have a purpose-built moot court, and they present it before 2 Supreme Court justices who usually bear a striking resemblance to myself and a colleague. It's actually a really good way of building your confidence at speaking and what have you. And if you get into it and you're at Lincoln, you're in love, because we enter lots of competitions nationally and sometimes internationally. Dissertation is a long piece of work that you would undertake in your final year. It's 12,500 words, and has to be on a topic that you really fancy, that you're really interested in, to keep you going through the duller bits of it. And you get a supervisor to help you hone it to a work of art by the end, hopefully. And there's some practical assessments. So we have a pro bono law clinic at Lincoln, where students can get practice in interviewing real life people with real life problems. They go off, they research it, and they provide a written letter of advice. I should probably add that they do that under the supervision of a solicitor, because if you're at law school, being sued for dodgy advice would be the best advertising you'd want. But that's also an optional module now, so you can do law clinic and be assessed on it with a law placement as well. Street law is a program we run where we go usually into schools and we get the students to present a particular topic, and they can do it any way they want. It doesn't have to be a death by PowerPoint. They can present it any way they like. And master classes are something I run as a missions tutor, so I get students in from other places, and I give them a talk, usually on something controversial, because I quite like being controversial, and then I get our students to workshop it with them. So there's all these sorts of assessments that we can use. And that's the end of it. Now, I'm going to switch my screen off in a minute, but please, by all means, just grab my email address. It also works for Microsoft Teams if you have access to that. So we'll take some questions in a second, but if you think of the question you would like to ask, but you think of it as you sat watching I'm a Celebrity on Saturday, then by all means, come back to me with that. So I'll escape out of that, and let's have a look at the chat and see what we have. So does anybody have any questions for myself, for Callie there, or for Callum? Either I'm brilliant or you're being really shy. It's one of those two things. So any questions at all? Anything you'd like to know about uni life? Anything you like?
Can I just talk through the mic?
You can, Freya. Welcome.
Yeah, I was gonna ask because I want to do sociology and criminology at uni.
Right.
At the moment I'm doing A-level law, and I've been told by like a few teachers that some universities look down at it. Will it like affect me applying or not?
I can only speak for Lincoln. It certainly
Yeah.
wouldn't Lincoln. Now, as I said earlier, I think it's really unfair that you're encouraged to study something as a valid qualification, and then somebody in the uni sits and gets sniffy about it. As I say, as long as you remember that you'll come across some of the same topics, I think A-level law is a good thing to study, because you'll already have some idea of what you're letting yourself in for. So it certainly wouldn't affect an application to Lincoln. I can't speak for other universities though. Does that
Okay.
help?
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. It's like a radio phone in this, isn't it? We have the next caller, please. Yeah. Any other questions, guys? Lincoln does have, hi Freddie, Lincoln does have criminology individually, or you can do a law and criminology joint degree and have the best of both worlds. But yes, there is a criminology school in the School of Social and Political Sciences. Is criminology where your heart lies? We haven't decided on that. Do we offer a placement year or a year abroad? We do now offer a year's study abroad. We didn't for a long time because, well, there's two theories about the study abroad year. One is that you come back a more rounded and intellectually developed person. The other is that you go for a year's jolly up somewhere really nice. But we had a lot of requests for it, so we've introduced it. So, oh, right, I'll come back to you in a second, Freddie. I'm really still not very good at reading chat and talking at the same time. Multitasking is not my thing. So the year abroad, we have various places you can go. So you could go to Norway. I can't see if it's saying that's cold. Why would I want to go there? But you can also go to Tokyo. You can go to South Africa. You can go to Poland. And there's a few others in the pipeline. I think there's one in Australia in the pipeline at the moment. So if you fancy going somewhere where most of the indigenous wildlife tries to kill you, then maybe Australia is going to be your thing. As I say, it's not inked yet, that one, so I can't guarantee that. But the others I can. And there's details on the website of all the places you can go. If you were going to go, you would go between levels 2 and 3. And obviously we give you far more information at the time, because there's lots to think about. You'll go away for a year, come back, and all your mates are graduated, for example. So you have to kind of think it through. In terms of a placement year, we don't offer a placement year, but there is a module where a work placement, I think for 8 weeks, is part of it, and that's the law clinic and placement module I mentioned, and students do that at level 3. And Freddie, you're doing it at A-level at the moment, but you like the idea of criminal law. Well, you're in for a treat, because that's exactly what Karen's going to talk about very shortly. And personally, as someone who teaches criminal law, I agree. I think criminal law is really interesting. The slight difficulty with criminal law currently is that it's not very easy to make a decent living at if you're practicing it for various reasons, not least cuts in legal aid and those sorts of things. But it's certainly very interesting. Emma's left us. I hope that wasn't something I said. And you're very welcome, Sarah. As are you, Freddie. Any other questions people would like to? Oh, Emma's break. Any other questions people would like to ask? You can also ask Callie and Callum here. They are real life students. I normally say we've captured them from the wild, but it's lockdown. They ain't going anywhere. So they will answer questions honestly. We have paid them, but not enough to lie for us. No? Any questions for them? Right. Well, with no further ado then, I shall hand over. You're quite lucky. We've got Professor Karen Harrison, who's going to take you through something to make you think, I think. I think? Yeah. So I'll say goodbye. It was nice talking to you. Remember to shout us on Teams or emails if you would like to ask us any questions or whatever. And in the meantime, I'll hand over to Karen. So take it away, Karen.
Thank you, Simon. So I'm going to try and share my slides now. Can everyone see that? Thank you, Sarah. Brilliant. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take you through a criminal law sentencing type scenario. And I want to try and be as interactive as we can. So there are going to be questions for you to consider. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to sort of put some answers and some views in the chat. So what I want to do, first of all, is to introduce you to my friend Jack. So Jack is a 17-year-old student. He's currently in year 12 and he's studying 3 A-levels. He comes from a fairly close-knit family. He's interested in football and he plays for his county. And he has aspirations to go to university, obviously Lincoln, and to be a solicitor. So really, Jack could be any one of you, just a normal year 12 young man. Now, when I did this prep for this, I kind of didn't want to do it in the doom and gloom of COVID. So this is assuming normal life. So one night we're getting close to the end of year 12 and they decide that they are going to go out and have a good night out before their mock exams start. So he arranges to meet some friends in town, and even though he's probably not quite legal, he has a couple of alcoholic drinks. Now he's in the nightclub and he's involved in an incident. So he goes up to the bar in order to get a drink. And because it's just so busy in there, he knocks into somebody and he spills their beer all on the floor, a little on their jeans, but nothing too drastic. So he apologizes. He buys this man another pint of beer and he feels that everything is okay and doesn't really think about it anymore. After they've been in the nightclub, they decide that they really need to sober up a little bit before mum and dad come and pick them up. So they go and queue and get some chips. So we've had a good night out so far. But unfortunately, our good night out turns bad. I've clicked too many. Let me just go back. So whilst he's in the queue in the chip shop, he sees the person that he previously bumped into. And this guy is now incredibly drunk. And he starts getting into an argument with him. He doesn't remember that Jack bought him another drink. And he just keeps on having a go at Jack because he made him spill his drink. He made him drop it all down his jeans. So it ends up with him hitting Jack. Jack's a little bit drunk, but really not anything that's going to affect his judgment. But he feels, you know, that this isn't fair. He did buy him another drink and he hits him back. Now, unfortunately, the victim falls over. They're outside the chip shop and he strikes his head on the curb of the pavement and he splits his skull and dies. So what we've got here is a single punch death. So what I want you to think about now and put into the chat is, what do you think is going to happen now? I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. Or you can speak if you want to, it's up to you. You can tell from your response, Freddie, that you're doing criminal law. Going straight into the, he did not intend to kill him, no mens rea. What's going to happen, sort of generally, we've got a fight that has happened, we're outside our chip shop, we've got people looking around, but we've got somebody who unfortunately is dead on the floor. So what's going to happen? Okay, so what probably would happen is that the police would be called. Yeah, arrested. So we've got eyewitnesses, they'll be interviewed. Yeah, good. So the police are going to be called. They will take eyewitness accounts. You're right, they'll probably arrest Jack. They'll take him to the police station and they will interview him, and then they'll decide what charge there will be. And this is kind of criminal justice. So, you know, there is the option to do modules such as criminal justice. So that's not looking at the criminal law. That's looking at the system that allows the criminal law to function. So it will involve the police, it will involve the courts, and it will involve the sentencing aspects after somebody has been convicted. So yeah, we've got Jack, he's been arrested, and he's in the police station. So the next thing we want to consider, and Freddie was one step ahead of me, is the possible criminal charges here. Now, I'm not assuming any legal knowledge from any of you. So what I've done here is just try to explain the difference between murder and manslaughter. So the legal definition of murder is that the individual, the defendant, has caused the unlawful killing of another human being, and that they have the intention, which is the mens rea element, either to kill or to cause GBH. Now, manslaughter, there are different types of manslaughter, but in this scenario, it would be constructive manslaughter, or what's known as unlawful and dangerous act manslaughter. So to prove that, we need to show that there is an unlawful and dangerous act, and it was that act that caused the death of the victim. And here, the mental element, we need to have the intention or recklessness as to causing that unlawful act. So you don't need to prove, and I think this is a key point, you don't need to prove that there was an intention to kill or cause GBH. So they're the two main differences between those two offences. Now, one thing we might want to consider here is a possible defence. And when you do criminal law, you'll be looking at a number of offences, but also a number of defences. Now, some of those defences are what's known as partial defences. So, for example, you may have heard of loss of self-control, you may have heard of diminished responsibility. And if somebody is charged with a murder charge, and they're able to rely on either loss of self-control or diminished responsibility, it will reduce the murder charge to manslaughter. So it's only a partial defence. There will still be some liability. But with self-defence, it is going to be what's known as a full defence. So if Jack was able to prove self-defence, then there wouldn't be any charge at all. Now, again, I don't want to assume any knowledge. So very basically, to prove self-defense, you need to prove two aspects. Now, the first question is whether the force was necessary. Now, this is judged on the basis of what Jack thought. So the question isn't whether you or I thought the force was necessary, it's whether Jack thought the force was necessary. But the second question is whether the level of force is reasonable, and that's based on the reasonable man, so you and I or members of the jury. So would the jury consider that the level of the force that Jack used was reasonable? So we're at trial. What do you think the conviction should be? So I've told you what murder is. It's causing the death of somebody with an intention to kill or cause GBH. Manslaughter is you have committed an unlawful and dangerous act, and that has caused the death of the individual, and you intended to commit that unlawful act, but you didn't intend to kill. And that would be manslaughter, as Freddie's put in the chat. However, could he rely on self-defense? Because if he can, it will be a full defense. So that will mean that there'll be no conviction. So what do we think? Murder, manslaughter, or nothing at all? Okay, good. So we've got Freddie saying manslaughter, we've got Sarah saying manslaughter, Ellie manslaughter. Okay, we're getting lots of calls for manslaughter. Anyone else wants to put something in? Does anyone think that we could rely on self-defense? Yeah, Freya, if it was manslaughter, it wouldn't be a maximum life sentence. So the mandatory life sentence is only for murder. So if an individual is convicted for manslaughter, you can have what's called a discretionary life sentence. So the judge can still sentence someone to life, but generally it would be a lot less. Okay, let's see what happens then, shall we? And obviously I probably should have said this at the beginning. This is totally made up. Okay, so Jack is found guilty of manslaughter in our scenario. Due to the seriousness of the offence, he is sentenced to 12 months imprisonment. And at the time of sentencing, if you remember, he was 17 at the time of the offence, but at the time of sentencing, because it takes some time for serious cases to go through the court system, he's now 18, so we're now looking at him going into the adult secure estate. Is anyone surprised that he only got 12 months imprisonment? Does anyone think he should have got higher? Yeah, I think that's a fair enough point. And I know when I've done this exercise with other students, a lot of people, when I've asked them to predict the sentencing range, when we've had more time and I've been able to give them legal material, they have predicted a lot higher. The reason why it is so low is because this is seen, no, not because of his age, it's because of the nature of the offence. So this is seen as a single punch manslaughter. So in circumstances where clearly it's an accident and is, as I say, a single punch, there are a couple of cases where the courts have said that between 12 and 18 months is appropriate. So you have, for sentencing rules, you have like a standard recommendation, and then we may reduce that if there's been a guilty plea, so they've decided to plead guilty, or they may increase it if he had previous convictions. Okay, so we've now got Jack. He's 18, he's now going to prison, and he's going to an adult prison. Now it will be a young adult prison, so the way that we categorise offenders in the prison estate is we have children are under the age of 18, and they are held in either secure training centres, or they will be held in youth offending institutions, or they're held in secure children's homes, and that depends on age. Then we have what's known as young adults. So 18 to 21-year-olds, in theory, are meant to be kept separate from the main adult estate, although that doesn't always happen because of problems that we've got at the moment in terms of overcrowding. Okay, now lots of questions here for us to think about. We sent Jack to prison. What do you think we are trying to achieve by sending Jack to prison? What are our sentencing aims here, do you think? Okay, interesting. Reflection. All right. Anyone else? Rehabilitation. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Emma. I was kind of waiting for that one. I kind of assumed. I mean, I'm really pleased that it wasn't first, but generally most people want Jack to go to prison for punishment. You know, he's taken away somebody's life. So there is that feeling that You know, he deserves to be punished. He deserves to be taken away from his family and friends. What do we think? Yeah, I accept it was an accident, but if you look at it from the point of view of the victim's family, they're probably not going to be as forgiving as perhaps you are, Freya. What do we think prison is going to be like for Jack? So we know he comes from a close-knit family, he's got lots of friends, you know, he's fairly decent at school, has aspirations to go on to university. So what is prison going to be like for him, do you think? Mentally challenging. In what way do you think, Ellie? You're right, but I'm just trying to delve. In what way do you think? Anybody else want to put anything in the chat about what they think prison's going to be like? Yeah, good. So sort of boredom in a sense, you know, he's used to doing so much and now he's going to have a lot of that taken away from him. So let's move on to that then. What should he have access to in prison? Should he be able to go to the gym? Should he be able to play football? Should he have access to education opportunities? Could he start his degree, for example, or finish his A-levels off in prison? Should he be able to have a job? Should he have a PlayStation? Should he have a pool table? What should he have access to, do you think? I think once you've been named as a killer, that'll stick with you. Yeah, I agree. And we're going to come on to that at the end, Emma. Okay, good. So a lot of you saying that he should have access to his education. And I think for me, the key question is that one at that bottom, whether prison is a punishment or whether you go there to be punished. And I teach a penology module, which is about sentencing. And this is one of the questions I always ask my students, whether they think that you should go to prison to be punished or whether having your liberty taken away is punishment enough. And I think that's, you know, one for you to think about later on. Okay, so let's see how Jack is getting on. So generally, what we've got, what I've broken this down into is Jack's prison experiences in sort of like three separate terms. So the immediate effects when he first of all gets into prison, the immediate effects, the medium-term effects, and then what happens when he is released out into the community. Okay, so just looking at those immediate effects. Now, as I said before, one of the problems that we've got in the prison estate is that we are incredibly overcrowded. Now, that has gone down recently mainly because there haven't been as many court cases happening because of lockdown and the problems with COVID. So there is a massive, massive backlog of cases that need to go through the courts. People have still been let out of prison. So there's a tiny little lull of the amount of people in prison, but we're still talking about nearly 80,000 men, women and children who are held in custody at the moment. Many of those are held in prisons and held in cells that are designed for one person, but instead either they have bunk beds in there or sometimes they will have a bunk bed and a single bed in there. And the big problem with that at the moment under COVID restrictions is a lot of prisoners are spending up to 23 hours a day in their cells in very confined rooms. Now, because we are overcrowded, it does mean that you don't get a choice which prison you are sentenced to. I won't go into it in too much detail, but we do have different types of prisons. So maximum security, local prisons, training prisons, and open prisons. So the first thing that would have happened to Jack is it would have had to have been worked out which type of prison was suitable for him. And then he would have to go to the nearest one that has got space. So that means that he's 50 miles away from home. And he's pretty scared. So, you know, it has been convicted of manslaughter. That's a serious offence. So he's been locked up with other serious offenders, including those who have been convicted of murder. Now, he's obviously the new boy, and he's been tested by the other inmates. They want to see what Jack is made of. And that is a really scary environment for Jack to go into, not something that he is used to at all. And he's having to share a cell with somebody that he doesn't know. It's not a choice who you share with. And because several years ago it was held that it was inhumane to allow prisoners to slop out. So by that I mean they would have buckets in their rooms and they would use the buckets as toilets overnight. And then in the morning they would empty those buckets. That was known as slopping out. Because that was considered to be inhumane, which clearly it is, the prison service decided to get around that by installing toilets in cells. But they didn't put up proper screens. So it means that particularly when you're now having to share a cell, you've got a bunk bed in this room, you've got 2 people there, you have a toilet with a screen that may go up to sort of waist height, but it's open. So you're having to use the toilet in front of your cellmate and vice versa. So not a situation that Jack is comfortable with or used to at all. So there are immediate effects. So to start with, friends do come and visit. They feel incredibly sorry for Jack. But then, you know, they're busy with their A-levels, they're busy with other priorities in their lives, so they disappear. His mum finds it too upsetting to visit, and his dad doesn't get to come very often, partly because of, you know, we're 50 miles from home, but also due to work commitments. Now, he doesn't like the prison food. Prison food doesn't tend to be rated that highly, so he loses quite a lot of weight. Now, slowly he begins to get used to the regime, get used to the people that he's living with. And once that fear subsides, I mean, it was mentioned earlier, he finds it really boring. He finds, you know, it's a long time to be in his cell with very little to do. All of you, which was great, said he should continue with his education. Now, the vast majority of education programs in prisons are not designed for people of Jack's ability. They're basic numeracy and literacy skills. So the prison would not be able to provide him with A-level because they just wouldn't have the resources to justify doing that for 1 or 2 individuals. So there's nothing there in the prison that is suitable for Jack. And there's no work or training opportunities either. So there might be jobs, there might be opportunities to train in the prison. But again, because we're overcrowded, there just isn't anything for him. So he's been put on a waiting list. So because he's bored, he starts mixing with the wrong crowd, which, let's face it, he's in prison. It's not difficult to mix with the wrong crowd. And he's introduced to drugs. So something that he never, ever would have done in the outside world. He's doing it now mainly to relieve the boredom. And he starts kind of changing his attitude to life, to authority, to society. He's finally at the top of the list for a job, but he just can't be bothered anymore. He has no motivation to abide by the rules. The regime that he's living in terms of being locked up for long stretches of time, it's changed him. And he starts getting very resentful about the fact that he's in prison, which I think is probably understandable. His view was, as a lot of you said in the chat, he didn't mean it. He didn't intend to kill him. It was an accident. He doesn't think he should be there. And that kind of, you know, changes his opinion of people inside as well. Now, some of you may already know that when you're sentenced to a short custodial term, so I'm talking under 4 years, which Jack was, then you're released at the halfway stage. So we know that Jack was sentenced to 12 months, so he would come out at the 6-month stage. But he is still on supervision, so he will still be supervised by the probation service for that final 6 months. And he's on what's known as license. So he comes in, he's 19, he's got a number of license conditions. So that could be don't associate with other known offenders, don't drink alcohol, don't go to certain places. And if he breaches any of those license conditions, then they can revoke that license and they can send him back to prison for the remainder of his term. So you may have heard about how offenders are released from prison early. Yes, they are, but they are still under these license terms. So just to kind of look at where Jack is in terms of his life now. He's got GCSEs, but he hasn't got A-levels because he missed out on taking those exams. He's lost touch with all of his friends. He's no longer close to his family. He's quite upset about that, but he is trying to get his life back on track, and he enrolls on a college course to try and finish his A-levels. However, one of you mentioned this earlier, kind of the stigma attached to it. Kids see him in the street and shout murderer at him. He's unable to get a job, even at his local supermarket, and he's told by his college that he won't be able to be a solicitor due to his conviction. So he's just finding it incredibly hard, even though he did initially have those positive motivations. So he gives up. He decides he's going to contact his friends from prison, so those people that he was mixing with, and he starts spending his time with them. One night he's out, he's had a few too many to drink, he gets into a fight in a pub and the police are called, and he takes a swipe at the arresting police officer. And as we've said, that kind of behaviour is not acceptable if you're on licence, so his licence conditions are revoked and he's returned to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence in prison. So that's quite a long scenario that I've given you there. But what do we think? I go back to the chat. I asked you to consider what it was we wanted to achieve with him. And we had reflection, rehabilitation, and retribution. Have we achieved any of those with Jack? What do you think? And if you're happy to speak, I'm very happy to listen to you. Yeah, I agree, Freddie. I think that we have just made his life much, much worse. And I think that is a real problem when we are sending people to prison without any really good sense behind it. Yeah, he fell into some sort of cycle. It's almost as if he may have accepted that he needed to be punished. He may have been positive about being in prison to start with, perhaps taking the view of, I'll try and make the best of this. But because of the situation that we've got in prison at the moment with the overcrowding, there just aren't the opportunities in the prison estate that there should be there. You know, there's very little rehabilitation work that goes on, particularly with short-term prison sentences like Jack's. If you're in prison for 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 years, yes, there is time for you to be able to do something. We have what's known as training prisons, but they're only available for people who are serving sentences of 4 years or more. I feel like it's unfair. He killed someone, but he didn't mean to. It affects his whole life. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, this scenario could happen to anybody. And I think, you know, not that I want to scare any of you, but it could. And I think the sentence of 12 months takes that into account. We're not talking about a huge sentence compared to what you would get if it was a murder charge. But absolutely, the stigma and the long-term consequences of this are really serious. If the sentencing judge had a complete choice, if they didn't have to follow the law, what do you think they should have done in this scenario? Anyone think of anything? What if the sentencing judge didn't have to go by the law, so he didn't have to sentence to 12 to 18 months, and they had complete choice over what they could do here. What do you think the sentencing judge should have done? So, for example, I was reading I think it was a tweet a couple of days ago, and it was a US judge who was in a youth court, and they were quite minor offences, but rather than fining these young offenders, he was coming up with innovative ways of dealing with them. So for one person, she had to write an essay on the importance of voting. Somebody else had to do something else. I think they should have given him another punishment, community service. I don't think they'd want to give him a murder charge. Okay, maybe give him a lighter sentence, a very low risk prison. Okay, all right. Could they send him to a sort of rehabilitation centre? So interestingly, not all of you, but you're still talking about detaining him, taking him away from his family and friends. Freya's suggesting a community sentence, so using something that punishment, rehabilitation, but that would be based in the community. So you talk about community service, it's now called unpaid work, but it's the same thing. So you could have, I don't know, 400 hours of unpaid work. So that might be coaching young boys in a football team. We know that he's good at football, he plays for the county. It could be working in a charity shop. It could be doing the gardens of local elderly members, that kind of thing. What do you think about an approach that's known as restorative justice? So this isn't about punishment. This is about trying to repair the harm that the offence has caused. So generally, restorative justice is about getting the parties of a crime into the room to try and almost mediate a solution. So obviously, we can't get the victim into the room here because they are dead. So we'd be looking at the victim's family, and it would be about Jack having to face the victim's family. And some offenders have said they would rather go to prison for 12 months than face the family of their victim. And you understand that point of view? Yeah. I think that would be really, really hard, even though they would obviously know the full situation. They would know that Jack came from a good background, used positive actions, not in trouble before. Having to face a family who son you have caused the death of, that is incredibly hard. Yeah. But that has been known to work, and it has been known that the offender, so Jack and the victim's family, it can be a positive for everybody involved. So there is one quite famous example where this happened in Sheffield. So an individual caused the death of another in circumstances not too different to what I've talked about tonight. And after he'd served his prison sentence, he went and met the victim's parents. And this was all mediated with a organisation called Remedy. So it was handled incredibly sensitively. And the parents, even though obviously they were incredibly upset by the loss of their son, they could understand that it was an accident. And together, so the parents and the defendant, they set up a charity, and they went round to schools talking to year 12 and 13 students about the dangers of getting involved in fights and what could happen in terms of the consequences and what could happen in terms of similar situation that we've seen with Jack. Okay, I'm very conscious of time. I've got 2 minutes left. So is there any questions that anybody has for me? Or are there any questions that you've got now, you've now thought of for Simon, and I can take them back to Simon? Okay, well, thank you so much for taking taking part in that. I really wasn't sure how that was going to run in the chat, but I think it went really well from my point of view. So thank you for your contributions. Thank you for coming tonight. As Simon says, if you do have any questions, then feel free to get in touch with us. And from me, I hope you did enjoy it, and enjoy the rest of your night, what's left of it.